Producing, mixing, and mastering in the box versus producing, mixing, and mastering with analog equipment. Is there really a difference? And why do people keep talking about it so much? There's been a huge debate on this and there's so many different opinions, but I'm going to give you a slightly different perspective to what you might be used to regarding analog versus digital and that discussion. A lot of people don't realize that when you do use analog gear, you're not just hearing the sound of that gear. You're hearing the sound of your converter. The quality of your converter actually dictates a lot of what ends up coming back into your computer. People think that it doesn't really play a huge factor, but especially when you don't have very good ones, you end up hearing the sound of your converter. Now, why does this even matter? It matters because when you're using analog equipment, anytime you send audio outside of your computer and then take that audio back into your computer, it's going through a whole pass-through of analog to digital and digital to analog conversion, the other way around. Now, if you do that and stack that up time after time after time after time throughout an entire mix, that sound of that converter is getting stacked on top of itself over and over and over again. And this is why it's important to have a really good converter, which is a separate conversation. But what that means is if you want to really understand what being outside of the box versus inside the box is, and you have a decent converter, do a loop back. Because most of what you're hearing, especially if people are using really transparent equipment, like Millennia equipment, like, I don't know, whatever else out there is really, really transparent, Meg EQs, things that aren't necessarily meant to impart a lot of flavor, you're hearing the sound of conversion over and over and over again. Now, if you're at home and you have an interface and you're curious about mixing out of the box versus mixing inside the box, you can do this little test to be able to show you how dramatically a loopback and just taking sound outside of the digital domain into the analog domain, even if you don't have any outboard equipment, and then routing it directly back into the digital domain, you can listen to that and see exactly how much that does to the sound of what you're working on. It can very dramatically change the sound of your mix. If you're trying to do this experiment, what you're going to need to do, you're going to take your outputs 1 and 2, and you're going to route them using TRS or XLR cables right back into inputs 3 and 4. Now, instead of monitoring 1 and 2 inside of your DAW, you want to be listening and monitoring inputs 3 and inputs 4. That way, in real time, you're going to be hearing what it sounds like for your audio to pass through an analog to digital and digital to analog converter. That will give you some idea of what it is doing to bring audio into the analog domain, and help you understand why a lot of mastering engineers and a lot of people who do this kind of stuff at a high level, no matter where you are in the industry, use analog stuff. And because of the importance of the analog stage of processing, because of what we can do in the analog stage, you're not going to find a mastering engineer that's at the top of the industry who doesn't utilize analog gear and analog equipment. Simply taking it outside of the digital domain makes the mix glue together in a way that typically it pretty much never can in the box. So by doing this little experiment, you can essentially become a hybrid mixing and mastering engineer in seconds. Your converter is still very much so a piece of analog gear, as much as it is digital too. Now, what does any of this have to do with the whole digital versus analog thing? Well, which one is better? Well, the answer is both. You want to utilize the best parts of digital and the best parts of analog. And you need to understand what analog does, and if you don't understand that or haven't experienced it, it's hard to show you where it can fill in the gaps for what your digital stuff, your plugins, and your digital processing can't do as effectively, as quickly, and as naturally as incorporating certain parts of the analog domain into your mix, even if it's something as simple as doing a loopback in and out or out and in to your converter or interface. Even something as small as that introduces warmth, naturalness, introduces an overall glue and character to your whole mix, and does things for you that you might not believe. The answer is not in one or the other. It's in combining the two, even at the smallest and most discrete forms with just a simple loopback. Give it a try. Hope to shed some light on the topic, and I'll see you guys again soon. Ciao.